Hello, Internet. Gino, that Pinguino Grieco here again with another episode of Deep Listens. Today we're going to be talking about Firewatch, and I am joined, as always, by Billy the Wasp Slayer Rothert.
You know, many men find themselves on the greatest of journeys. I found myself in a tiny plane coming back from Orlando. And the only thing standing between me and actualizing my true self was a tiny wasp. Luckily, I came out on the winning end.
As humans so often do when pitted against tiny insects. And we are also joined by the snickering voice of Peter Giggles Busby.
What's going on, everybody? I do love to giggle. I'm going to be throwing a lot of shade this episode. I can already feel it brewing within me.
Wow.
So let me start this way. I'm going to start this shade off right. I watched some YouTube videos of Firewatch to see how other sort of conversation trees played out. And I have no idea why PewDiePie is so popular. It baffles me.
Children?
Children?
There are children.
Okay.
Actually, I saw a YouTube video that tried to break down why the heck PewDiePie is so popular, and what they came up with was that he, by living in Europe and kind of moving around, between the EU countries in his mid-20s, while he was recording his YouTube videos, because he lived in a country with a huge social safety net, he's in one of the Norse countries, I forget which one, he was able to kind of make YouTube videos without being completely in poverty. And so he moved around, which allowed him to, when he posted his video, because he was English speaking in a bunch of different European countries, it would get his video would get recommended to people of those countries, which at a certain point he was getting views from like Italy and Spain and Sweden and all these different countries that all of a sudden, if you're like looking for an English speaking video for a particular game, he was the only thing that would come up. And then at a certain point, it just kept aggregating more and more people by recommending him over other people to where it became an international thing.
What I'm hearing is that the popularity of PewDiePie is another in a long list of excellent arguments against big data.
Yes, it is it is an accident caused by algorithms. He was granted this favor. Basically, he got put on the front page of people's inbox by algorithms.
Now I know why I hate algorithms.
And then you couldn't stop him
thing for me.
Because children, it turns out, love him. And we are also joined by a special guest, Jim Oliver. Hello.
How you doing?
Firewatch expert?
Yeah, sure. We can go with that.
Jim recommended this game to me, which is sort of the pebble that started the avalanche that made us all here right now.
So Jim will be the target of most of my shade then.
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Can you throw side-eye on Skype?
Yes.
I guess I can do that.
Side-eye?
Firewatch apologist. Jim.
Yes. Hey, as long as I don't get attacked by a raccoon, I'm good.
Fair enough. So, to start things off, no feedback for this episode. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can go ahead and reach us at Deep Listens Pod on Twitter, deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com, or deeplistens.libsyn.com. We love your commentary. We read all of it. So, with that out of the way, Firewatch. Let's start out in a mechanical place, just so we don't... This is all going to be one episode. We'll tell you when the spoilers start happening, but until then, we'll try to keep it relatively spoiler-free. So what did you guys
let's do the intro?
I guess, sure. Billy, explain the intro.
Okay, so Firewatch is set up, the first 5 minutes of the game, you're given this, series of options to sort of build your character. I use that phrase really loosely here because it's not character building in the traditional sense. It's more of a background structuring, sort of like how you would want it. Then the first 5 minutes of the game is
It's character building in the sense that most literature uses character building, and not in the sense that you're going to pick from a skill tree and then +2 to your fire watching, -2 to your hole digging powers,
Whatever. So what we get is a man named Henry in his late 30s takes a job as a fire lookout in Shoshone National Park in Wyoming. It's about the story takes place over the 80s decade, and the most recent events of the story take place in 1989, which is notable since there's like no internet, no cell phone, no anything like that. That's sort of an important thing to note. We find out that Henry's wife develops early onset Alzheimer's, or no, early onset dementia. Early onset dementia, and she moves to Australia to be with her family. In response, Henry takes this job to sort of clear his head, get away a little bit. Henry, on his first day, meets his supervisor named Delilah, who is a lookout at another tower, but is sort of his direct supervisor. And events ensue as Henry begins his Firewatch lookout, I guess, stay for the duration of the summer. I believe it's an 80-day duration.
Cool. So, mechanically speaking, you're mostly walking from place to place, and you're talking on your walkie-talkie to Delilah. What did you guys think of the actual way in which you communicated with Delilah? So, you kind of press the shift key if you're on PC. Well, I guess it's... Is it on anything other than PC? I think Firewatch.
Well, you use a Steam
it's
controller.
on PS4 as well.
Okay, it's also on PS4. On PC, at least, you press the shift key and then mouse wheel down to which dialogue option you want to select. And then when you release, it's kind of like letting off the button on a walkie-talkie. And Henry will say something in accordance to what kind of the dialogue prompt would lead you to think he'd say. It's kind of a Mass Effect style system where you're picking from a wheel, and it just kind of gives you the gist of what he's going to say.
Yeah. I was going to mention that it's in some places it's exact, but in others it's not exactly. It's more like that Mass Effect system where it's just a gist of what you want to say.
Yeah, it kind of happens in BioWare games, kind of happens in Telltale games. So we're kind of familiar with this system. I think the way it's delivered here feels a little more organic to me. It doesn't quite feel as much like I'm choosing from a list, even though sometimes I am. It feels more like a natural intellectual decision of how you would carry a conversation with somebody. When I think about the BioWare games or Telltale game, there seems to be like vastly different ways you can take a conversation, and some of them have like alignments, like morality alignments or relationship alignments. This isn't really the case here. It's really more of just steering conversation. So I think it feels a little more organic in this game than it does in especially games like Mass Effect when there's like clearly like Paragon and Renegade options.
And improving that sort of organic feel to it. I mean, I didn't bother seeing how long it would go on for. But like if I recall Mass Effect correctly, there's sort of a world stoppage sort of feeling while you select your dialogue tree, where in this game, if you don't answer her, she'll repeat her question, sort of keep talking a little bit. I didn't bother to see how long that effect would go on for, but it's nice that it doesn't sort of stop time. You're sort of still immersed in whatever's going on.
Yeah, and the game, I think in having all of the communication be done via walkie-talkie, it really lends a sense that the conversation is flowing in a way that it wouldn't if it's two people locked eye to eye while you're mousing around between options. Because that's just not the natural flow of speech. Whereas when you're not making eye contact and when you don't know the other person on the end is necessarily listening to you or ready to hear you, you don't feel this sense of awkward gap. And the game does a nice job of communicating. There's kind of a bar that fills up as you're looking at options, and once that bar fills up, it will let you know, okay, either you missed a chance to talk, or the game's going to do something to try and encourage you to talk. So that kind of, it adds some sense of, I guess, momentum to your speech. Like, you need to make a choice right now. It adds, I guess, what is the word I'm looking for?
An immediacy?
Yes. To your dialogue that you need, but without kind of the Mass Effect, we're going to lock eyes, or the Walking Dead, if I miss my chance, oh shit, someone might die. It's in between. It's somewhere in between.
There is an element of kind of relationship building. I feel like if you went through the game and you missed all your chances to develop the only conversation you have with your supervisor, it will negatively trend the responses you might receive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
on occasion, at least only once that I recall off the top of my head, is that if I missed a chance to respond and Delilah actually closed down or went away for a while. So I don't know if that trends towards the rest of the game. I didn't play to seek that mechanic, if it would develop over the game, but I think it might change how the story progresses a little bit.
Yeah, it definitely. I had her go away from the walkie-talkie once as well, and I actually restarted the day as a result, because that game is it's all dialogue, and the notion of having I tried to then talk to her about other stuff, and she wouldn't come back online. So you kind of lose a level of interactivity if you piss off the only person you're talking to for this entire game, basically.
And that's true. I mean, you really only have one dialogue partner. Everything else is super, super limited. It's Henry and Delilah, and their teams, like they are a team working together in this sort of gameplay narrative, and the relationship that you build matters. I mean, I think Gino will echo that there's some sense where the decisions that you make actually matter in this game. Now, we're going to pump the brakes on that a little bit, because it does have that sort of telltale kind of model where, yes, you can diverge a little bit, but things kind of always come to very critical plot points no matter what you do. So not every single dialogue option makes a whole new game, but the relationship can change. The way you speak to one another can change. So in some sense, what you say does matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that subtle change in tone, depending on what dialogue options you pick, I think does as much or more than, you don't need giant swinging things. I think we had this discussion a little bit with Until Dawn, where that game, again, is kind of...
shit.
It's kind of diamond-shaped. You start at the same point and you end at the same point, and it looks like it's fanning out, but ultimately will all come back to, one or two specific points. And I think, like that game, the subtle changes in tone and the differences in relationships change the game enough for me that it feels like a very different game, even if it isn't. Especially considering what you choose kind of makes Henry a very different person, depending on how you want to play him. And that seeing how Henry's responses to the things in his life impact other people and their perception of him, I think is what a lot of this game is. So outside of the basic dialogue system, what did you guys think of the kind of, I guess, Legend of Zelda or Metroid-esque item acquisition that happens in the game?
Yeah, so this game did a pretty good job of making it not so explicit that they were doing this. Basically, Henry has a couple ways he can interact with the environment, and it's very limited at first, and that sort of limits the way this game progresses in a positive way. Like, you can't find some place that you're not supposed to go now and sort of spoil something for you until the game lets you do that. And that happens in games like Gino said, Metroid, or Castlevania style games. And so, but I think it was just so subtle that it made it seem like the world was actually bigger. I think the limitations here actually made the world seem bigger, because anytime we could go to a new place, it seemed like we were going to a radically new, wide open area. When in fact, the way you move around the map is not that big.
Yeah.
Very linear, because you're essentially running down forest trails the entire time. You're not really exploring left and right of the trails. You're just going to the next mission, if you will. Yeah.
I was still surprisingly fond of orienteering as a gameplay mechanic, though. I mean, just the sort of stupid thrill of checking things off on the map, drawing those little paths. Like, ooh, here's a cache. I can update my map now. Something about that I just found satisfying.
Yeah, looking at an actual digital physical map, instead of having the little map icon in the bottom corner, having to actually press a button to pull a map up and look at it with a compass in your hand and say,
and you take that as a little pencil, marks it off.
And marks it off. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed going to caches and finding items within them, and finding different bits of story, either notes left by other people or why is this book here? Why is Jane Eyre in this in this cache?
I spent a lot of time criticizing the book choices.
Because it's where it belongs.
How many of those books are actually real?
They're all real.
Only a
They're all
few.
real.
Really, they're all real?
Only
I
a
think
few
so.
of them were real.
Everything is the realist.
I don't think they're all real.
Are you
How
sure?
would we know?
Because I think my mom, my mom actually watched this entire game when I played it. And she fact-checked, like, one of the books. I was like, that book seems weird. Does that book actually exist? And I think she said that no, it doesn't. I'm not sure if all these books
One of the
are
books
real.
like was a Metal Gear Solid reference. A lot of the books are actually references to other games. One of the first books you come across in your cabin is like the Patriots, and it's the logo for Metal Gear Solid, and it's written
Fine.
by like the guy from Metal Gear Solid and stuff like that.
I'm even more disappointed in Firewatch now.
So, what did you guys think of the acquiring rope, acquiring
Can never have
fire
enough.
axe, like the different ways that it allowed you to move around the map? I thought it was a pretty natural way to expand your purview kind of throughout the game. It
Yeah.
lets you organically gain more access to this park.
Yeah.
And provide shortcuts too. I mean, once you can link up those ropes, because I mean, conceivably you didn't need all the ropes you found, but just the fact that you have these shortcuts now, it creates an experience of being more familiar with the landscape as you progress through these 80
Right.
days.
I think it was actually kind of funny how when he found the ropes in order to unlock those rope points, he said, there's a bunch here. Probably enough that I can just leave them up anywhere and not have to worry about any kind of inventory consideration. I mean, games sometimes forget to explain stuff like that, and Firewatch, I think, was kind of poking fun at that and saying, like, I have enough ropes that I'm not going to need to worry about taking them down or keep track of how many I have.
Thanks.
Thanks, ropes.
Backpack.
Thanks, ropes.
and how you have exactly enough to get through all of the ones that all of the link ups that they have out on the map. You don't ever have not enough, and you don't ever have too few that you need to take one down or anything like that. So yeah,
Yep. And yeah, I found a fire axe. I guess I'm in this Shoshone National Park, but I'm going to cut down this tree. I'm just going to cut it down. This tree, I think this should be a shortcut. So I'm going to cut this tree down and then make a little shortcut for myself. I work for the park. It's fine.
I'm going to segue to a new point of the conversation, which is the perspective, okay, and sort of the way you interact with the environment. That's not a particular like interactable point, like a hook to put a rope on, or a crack in a rock to put one of the mounts in. There's other sort of environment interactables, and I think they're chosen very specifically, and it's done pretty elegantly. So, for example, there are some spots where you can sort of climb up or step down, but they're worded in such a way that you can get back if you just had to go there, so it's kind of safe. But the game also tells you, hey, look, you've come across a ledge. This is a long drop down, and it sort of gives you a clue right off the bat, hey, if you take this path, you can't immediately come back this way, so be careful. You might get to some place where you can't, or like you might not be able to get back to this spot when you want to. And I like games doing that because I really hate it when I see a game presents me a lot of options and I don't know which way is the actual plot progression or where I can't come back from. One game that I think really sort of offended me in this way was Transistor. Had a room like 80% of the way through the game that I wanted to see a bunch of interactables in the room. There was like tons of interactables, and I picked one. I didn't know that was one that actually took me out of that room, and I progressed away. So I'm sort of like I'm really attuned to when that happens because I don't like it. And so this game gave me an opportunity to make sure that I don't miss anything, and I like that.
Billy, you know what game actually did a really good job of presenting those sort of, this is a story progression moment?
What?
Charles Barkley Shut Up and Jam Guy Den.
Oh, you know what?
Really
Fuck
did a good
that
job of
game and everything it was about.
You apologize to Sir Charles Barkley because that is what it was about.
I'll need Cyborg Vince Carter to come to my house and threaten me, and then maybe,
Half man, half amazing, half robot.
maybe I'll apologize for what I said about Charles Barkley. But until then, no.
Fair enough.
That game was dog shit.
We're getting very recursive.
Not true.
lately.
I feel like your takes get hotter the further away we get from actually discussing the game in question. Like, all of a sudden, at first, it was just like, yeah, that game, I didn't like parts of it. There was a lot of heart there. And then 2 podcasts later, it's like, fuck that game. Fuck everyone involved with that game.
You know
Burn
why?
it down.
Because the last 2 weeks I've been playing actual good games, and I realized how shit that game was.
That's 3 weeks, you mean?
Well, however long it was.
I just want to say that was made by 2 people for, like, free. So maybe give them some slack. That game was fine.
All right.
Back to Firewatch.
Slack given, back to Firewatch.
So you mentioned the prompts. I thought that they did do a very, very good job of cueing you as to what each of the steps and jumps and stuff could do. I also found that their animations for interacting with different objects were pretty evocative or pretty endearing. Like, when you pick up a book, if you place it, he places it with a damn purpose. If you decide to, he throws the books. If he doesn't want to hold the book anymore, he just freaking throws it. And I don't know if Henry's a very angry man, but I started to get the feeling that he was, like, just pissed at the world at the way he was treating mugs and books. Because if you pick something up, there are some times where it will say place book, and on a bookshelf. You'll just put it right back, and it sits perfectly. It's great. Right. But if it says drop book, you throw it as far as you damn can.
And I think that's part of a mechanic thing in that, like, when you pick up your never mind, I won't bring it up because that's story stuff, but you pick up things and you only get to place them properly if you're looking at the right place.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't really a story spoiler, but like, a picture frame falls off the wall and you can pick the thing up. And if you look back to where it goes, you used to like place it nicely, but otherwise you kind of just like drop it, like Gino said.
Yeah, and I thought that it's hard for an animation like something that simple where it's a pick up and place mechanic to show some sort of emotional heft. But I found that when it says something about Henry that when he drops something, this is how he drops it. And I thought that was nice. I
mean, I guess, but maybe let's think about it from a game design perspective. Like I don't know, Gino, you're usually the one who stands up and defends programmers for not being able to put so many things in the game because there may be prohibitive factors of coding this kind of stuff. Maybe they were just expecting, okay, look, 99% of the time when someone's picking up an object, it's probably going to be a rock or a pine cone outside, or it's going to be some environment interactable, not the things that are all in Henry's watchtower. Those are the only things that are sort of like civilized things as opposed to a rock or a pine cone or a stick that you might find in the environment. And sure, if he like just throws a rock across, the trail, that's pretty reasonable, but yeah, throwing a book is weird, but they just sort of program the same throw mechanic. Yeah,
and that's what I'm saying, is that by choosing that to be the consistent way in which he interacts with objects, it says something about him. That is the force with which he treats all things. Is it my wedding ring? That's how I throw it. If it's a book, that's how I throw it. If it's a rock. So I started to get the feeling like Henry seems like he's a mad man. Or something's going on with Henry. He seems like he's not quite right, because no one would treat some of these objects that I'm having him pick up the way he's treating them.
Would you be a right man if your wife had early onset dementia and you were
and that's why I was like, this is a character
out of her life? Yeah.
This is why I was like, this is probably a character development thing. This was an intentional choice and not just a coding lapse or a weird quirk of the physics engine. I think that they chose for him to move things that way, which I think it was cool.
So slight shift in mechanics discussion. I had one kind of problem with the game, which was how it used I don't know how it was on the keyboard and mouse. I use a gamepad when I play Steam games, and in order to use your map, use your compass, at some point you find a camera, like you use like the D-pad for those things, and it was kind of clunky. I felt like it wasn't very fluid. Sometimes if you had one thing out and you pushed a button, it might have brought up the other item, it might have not. Like, for example, having the compass active, you could push the map button and it would just bring up the map as well. Or you could sometimes have the compass by itself or just the map by itself, or like maybe the camera trump that little bit was kind of clunky. I think it could have been designed a little bit better. Maybe in terms of like a cycle through what object is active sort of thing. I think that could have been done a little bit cleaner as opposed to like up on the D-pad is this, down on the D-pad is that, left or right is this thing. But sometimes they trump each other and sometimes they don't. So it's hard to shift between objects sometimes.
Yeah, it seemed like there were a couple of objects that paired with the map, and then the camera kind of was a separate object unto itself. Like, you could have a compass pair with a map or a different item.
And you could always, like, flashlight during all that stuff. It's like, it was a little bit clunky. I think that could have been done a little bit better.
Yeah, on the keyboard, each of those are different keys. Like, M is the map key, C is the camera key. The only problem I had with those specific controls are when I needed to then talk on the walkie-talkie, because you cannot pull up the walkie-talkie when you have your map pulled up. So I would have, like, dialogue options, but I couldn't actually use my walkie-talkie, and you're on a timer as soon as someone starts talking to you. So I'd be orienteering, and then maybe I'd have to do a quick response, and I didn't realize in time that I had to drop the map to then pull up my walkie-talkie. It was a little bit clunky, and that happened to me once, and then I figured it out, and it wasn't a problem again, but that's something where I feel like in a game where dialogue is so important, having the walkie-talkie not supersede all other controls, it could lead you to having a problem.
One bit of inconsistency was that if you were rappelling down a rope, you could still walkie-talkie. And both your hands were visibly occupied by the rope.
Yeah. There were some moments like that. Some moments where, like, I'm still talking on the walkie-talkie even though I'm throwing rope around this loop or I'm cutting down this tree.
Right. Or if you choose your dialogue option and it might be maybe like a 2 or 3 sentence interaction on Henry's part, you could then like drop down a ledge and you see his hands are not holding a walkie-talkie, but instead like
climbing.
Like he's basically climbing, not walkie-talkieing.
Yeah. I always assumed at that point it was like looped near his face and he was still talking, like he had the button to press somehow and it was just on like a clip, but that's probably just me being overly generous. Yeah, I mean, it's a little inconsistent, and, there are times when the game, you'll trigger another set of dialogue while you're still trying to have the first conversation.
True, that did happen once.
Happened a lot.
Like, if you're near another interactable, a lot of times when you come across a critical point, like a setting or a plot development point, if you got there particularly quickly, or if you were exploring and found some other thing you can talk to Delilah about, you might accidentally cut off one conversation by starting another, because when you hit the dialogue choice button, it will include all available options on the screen, basically.
Yeah, which it could lead to some dialogue awkwardness, but I found it was okay more often than not.
Yeah, it was like the parts where the machine broke were kind of few and far between. They were noticeable enough that I think it deserved a comment here.
Sure. So, do we want to get to Spoiler Town?
I think there was one more thing that I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
And I think it's a good segue into Spoiler Town.
I like Spoiler Town.
I think it was important, and they did this kind of differently, how they started the game. I want to examine this a little bit in detail. The first 5 minutes of the game take the player through a series of choices. So yeah, this is definitely the best segue into Spoiler Town because this is actually the start of the story. So
spoilers are happening.
Spoiler Town, here we come right after this one last sort of mechanical examination. At the start of the game, you're presented this sort of mystical screen that has this kind of a 80s, almost like a, what do you call it? Almost like a lava lamp kind of vibe, or
yeah, in the background, kind of.
Yeah,
it's sort of like a text adventure almost.
Yeah, it's like a text.
80s.
All right, well, man, whatever, Dude, I wasn't alive then.
VH1.
So, it asks you a series of questions that set up Henry's backstory. The first one being, you're at a bar, you're drunk, you see a pretty girl, what do you say to her? And your two options are bad. It's what's your major or whatever? That's one of your options. Or it's hey, you're pretty. And, so they're both terrible options. It doesn't matter. She ends up being your wife anyway. There's things like, what kind of dog do you get? how do you respond when, in your backstory, you and your wife are approached by a mugger? Your dog, runs away and leaves. Actually, did you guys pick Husky or Beagle? Or sorry, it was
It's German Shepherd.
German Shepherd or Beagle.
I picked the Shepherd.
Shepherd.
Did anyone pick the Beagle?
I picked the Beagle the second playthrough.
Does the
did.
Beagle run
Punk
away?
out.
Yes.
No, the Beagle I thought the Beagle just can't do anything.
It's just ineffective.
I think actually it might run away. Buckets might run away.
It shocked itself. To use the Pokemon reference.
Shocked itself. Well, either way, there are things like your wife, Julia, comes home from a bar, clearly been drinking, having a good time, and you're kind of mad about it. Do you confront her? Do you get mad at her, or do you ignore her? Those are two very clearly bad options. Get pissed off at her or ignore her are not two good options that a player would choose, but we're sort of forced to choose them. I'm not going to really criticize that much because they can only do so much, and they don't want to give away. All right, go ahead, Gino.
It's not
That's
they
who
can
Henry
only
is.
do so much. That is who the character is. They're saying
Yeah,
these are
they're
the two
building
choices
Henry.
that Henry could make. Yeah, but you're saying it they can't present all the options, but it's no, these are the two options that Henry would ever do.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. I would not say that they're taking away my options, but they're giving me enough choice to make me emotionally invested in Henry. There's just enough of me and my choices in Henry that I care about Henry. And likewise, when we start talking to Delilah and choosing these dialogue options, whatever you choose, you're going to have some kind of emotional investment in it, whether you think Delilah's annoying and you ignore her, or if you think she's a cool person and you develop a really good relationship with her. I actually did look up somebody who just never ever talked to Delilah and what happens, and there's still just 8 or 10 forced scripted interactions, and it gets kind of inconsistent and weird sometimes. Where you have the option of mentioning your wife Julia to Delilah, or you can just skip all that stuff, and there's one time where she still mentions Jules, even though you never ever told her about it. Either way.
Is that one of the... And I guess since we're in Spoiler Town, population 4, it's okay. But is that the sequence where we're dreaming? Henry's dreaming? And
that is the sequence where Henry's dreaming.
So technically she should know who Jules is... ish, in that it's important enough that you slept, walk, talk.
True.
To Delilah.
Yeah, it's implied that you have a conversation where you think you're talking to Julia and you're actually talking to Delilah. So maybe, depending on how long that conversation goes, you don't really get to see a whole lot of it when you're playing. Depending on how long that goes, it might make sense that Delilah has a pretty good idea of who your wife is, regardless of whether you told her or not. And I think that was probably a nice touch in terms of storytelling to make it. That's their attempt at not making it awkward. Even though you're clearly supposed to be having these conversations with her, they make the game give it just enough so that they don't have to rewrite everything.
Also, if you do not, there is a time where a forest fire starts, and Delilah gives Henry the option of naming it. And if you say nothing, she just calls it the elk fire, which I think is not one of your options.
No, that's a real name. It's none of the names I would have picked.
Yeah, either way, there's some times where you can just ignore her. What I meant to say was there are some times where you cannot just ignore her, and the game forces you to have an interaction. But it seems like if you choose to just never interact with Delilah, you really don't. There's really nothing to gain there. You just sort of lose only. You just only lose out on the situation.
Makes sense.
All right, Spoiler Town?
Pete, did you have something to say?
No, I'm saving it. It's going to become an eruption, a burst of fiery vitriol. But we'll wait for it. We'll get to it.
Okay. So...
Wait, are you going to say twee?
No, this wasn't a twee game. That was a little twee. That turtle was kind of twee.
I didn't find any turtles.
You didn't find a turtle?
You didn't look hard enough.
You can get a turtle, and you can name him.
What?
Yeah. You put him
Where
in a
could I
box. Nothing
It's
else.
over by the lake.
When?
Jonesy Lake. if you go down further past where you interact with the two naked girls, on a rock.
Constellation turtle.
Specifically,
Yeah,
it's when you're looking for their campfire. You see the thin layer, like the thin line of smoke. It's during that event.
Yeah. There's a turtle on a rock.
Gino,
No.
in your defense, you can take about 3 paths to get there, and only one of them has the turtle.
Well, I picked the fucking wrong one then. I
Yeah,
guess.
man, you effed up.
The turtle path, I think, is the path of least resistance, but it's not actually the fastest.
Shit. Well, I guess I need to replay this game now that I clearly didn't play it and get the good ending.
All right. All right.
Turtle.
We're in Spoiler Town, but
Turtle killed Brian.
we didn't really give any context for what the fuck is going on in this game. So I'm not going to go over the entire story, but I'm going to get us just like up a good bit. Okay?
That's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
So we start our first day at Firewatch Training Academy. You know, Delilah's talking to us. We're in our little watchtower, and we're making ourselves accustomed to the situation. First day on the job, we see some fireworks. Delilah says, hey, go tell those people that they cannot have fireworks in the park. You can have a couple dialogue options to make that line of conversation have some particular flavor. It's not that important. You're tasked with this mission to go talk to these people who are shooting off illegal fireworks. You go do that. You find that it's actually 2 young females skinny dipping. They're drunk. They have been shooting off fireworks. They've been littering, just being degenerate humans. And you tell them, hey, you know, stop shooting off fireworks. And they think you are being a creepy, you know, like
Old man,
peeping Tom.
You're pervert.
Yeah.
Well,
They think you're being a creepy old man and
to
spying.
be fair, you are talking to 2 naked teens in the middle of a lake.
Who are drunk,
Who
who
are
have
drunk,
no
skinny
idea
dipping.
probably what's going on.
Right.
Yeah.
You're a little pervy.
So just a little bit further is once you confront the teens and you kind of leave.
Well, I have a question
Yeah.
for that part. How many of you took their boombox?
I
I
did not.
picked it up.
threw it
Did
in
you
the
keep
lake.
it?
I
You
kept
threw,
it.
you threw it in the lake?
Stole
You can throw it in the lake. They were like, "Oh, you fucker! No! Oh my god! You stupid asshole!"
No, I
They-
picked it
their
up and
reaction
walked
is
away with it.
priceless.
I brought the boombox home.
Did you bring the whiskey home though?
No, I thought that so early on in the game, a lot of the early stuff, the pre-story, there's a lot of him drinking, and it's very clear that Henry is probably an alcoholic, and if he's not, it's because he's denying the fact that he's an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt that giving him the alcohol would probably be a bad choice. So I was making the choice that I don't think Henry would have made.
Okay.
But I took their boombox, walked it all the way home, and
Did
then
you confiscate the fireworks?
I confiscated the fireworks too.
I think
But-
everyone confiscates the fireworks.
That actually, I took Sergeant, who's the little cutout, Forrest Burns.
Yeah.
I took Forrest Burns and I put him in my outhouse.
Or is it Royal? Is it Royal Burns?
No, it's Forrest. It's Forrest
Okay.
Burns. And so I picked him up. I jammed him in the outhouse so that he would always, anytime I opened the door, he'd be like stuck. And then I thought about whether I should take the boombox and put it in the outhouse or in the toilet, or if I should put it in my home. And I took it up and put it in the little firehouse, which kind of leads to a story plot hole later on. But that's fine. So, no one else apparently stole the boombox.
No one stole the
Well,
boombox.
I tossed it in the lake. So
I'm a forest ranger. There's a code.
You're not a forest ranger, though.
We're a lookout. There's
I'm
a
a
different.
forest
Yeah.
lookout. There is also a code.
There's a hierarchy.
There's a similar code.
So that gets us pretty decently far into the story. Like, what is going on? We're just basically dealing with very typical forest, like
Well,
park
the-
stuff.
The first day you
The first
are.
couple
The
days,
second
yeah.
day you are not. Well, they cut the second day you wake up and it turns you talk to Delilah a little bit more and she tells you that someone cut the communication line between
No,
you and the outside world.
she says that the storm knocked out the line and that you have to go look at the line, and
That's
that's
true.
when you find out that it was cut.
We skipped one bit though. Is that when
Okay.
you return to your lookout tower, you find it destroyed. Like you find it ransacked.
Oh yeah,
That's
After
the-
interacting with a weird, creepy guy who's
Yeah,
shining a
sure.
flashlight at
Yeah,
you.
so on your way back from confronting the teens in the lake, two important things happen. You meet another person who you don't really get a good look at. They just have like a flashlight, and they kind of shine it at you and then walk away. You don't really get to interact with them at all. You just sort of see another person sort of passing by off in the distance. And you get back to your watchtower, it's sort of ransacked. That's what prompts Delilah to want to phone it in to say, hey, question those girls, see if they ransacked all your shit. And then we find out that Delilah actually cannot get through the phone line anymore. That's what makes you want to go investigate what happened to the phone line.
Yep. And so then you investigate the phone line, and it seems that the teens have cut the phone line. There's a piece of underwear with, like, your face drawn
Go to
on
hell.
it, and with "Go to Hell" written on it.
There's a note there, too.
Yeah, you follow a trail of beer cans back to their hideout, or their little campsite, and you find it ransacked with a note that basically accuses you of being a creepy perv who ruined their campsite. So at this point, what did you guys think was going on?
Some sort of marauder in the park.
So did you think that the girls actually cut the line and that someone ransacked their tent?
Well, it was the underwear.
The line I just couldn't get around, because what pair of teenage girls would go because where their actual campsite is all the way across the map from where the line is cut. And how many of them do you think would go all the way across the map, climb a telephone pole on top of a hill, and then chop a line?
Yeah, it seemed kind of like that's like way too far out of their natural response.
Habitat.
If they trashed our lookout tower, pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
Like, you could probably blame them for that if you didn't know what was going on. But cutting a phone line seemed out of their reach. And I mean, obviously we've all played the game. We know, what actually happens. But at this point, I was thinking that when I saw the cut phone line, when I saw the ransacked tent, I thought that it was neither me nor the teens. I actually suspected Delilah, actually, at some point.
Yeah.
I definitely thought it wasn't. When I saw the underwear and when I saw the trail of beer cans, I sort of thought it was the teens, but then I thought the idea of leaving a trail of beer cans the whole way, so you're going to be drunk.
Was it the whole way, though, or was it part of the way you find the rope and then you have the thin plume of smoke way out in the distance? Because that's how I remembered.
And you also catch a little piece of fabric as well.
And both of those, I thought the idea of someone being drunk, climbing up that tower, cutting it, not even cutting it like at the point where it meets with the tower, it's like cut halfway down the line.
Yeah, that seems weird too. So
yeah, so
but I think that was a limitation of the game.
I don't know. I just thought that, well, the other answer is they didn't cut it, and
Right.
someone else cut it using more sophisticated tools than those two teens might have had. And then when you get back to their place, it's completely ransacked. I thought it was a bear.
Yeah.
Probably that, like, the damage looked like bear damage. Like,
it seemed
a
bear
tent
related.
torn up.
Yeah,
all the
because
clothes everywhere.
they don't have a bear bag. They are just leaving their shit all on the ground.
Just
Of course, a
ratty
bear's
jeans.
gonna roll through there.
Yeah, and you find trees marked by you can find a tree marked by a bear. So I figured there's probably a bear in the area. I actually thought I'd eventually come across it, but I did not. So on the way, actually something I found on the way to that line before I went to find the teens, I found an outhouse and an old destroyed cabin. Did you guys find that?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did you think happened there?
That one was a fire had overtaken a. If you listen, because you can get a story if you go downstairs in the cabin. I don't know how far y'all went into the cabin, but if you go downstairs in the cabin, there's an old like oven, like wood-fired stove thing, and a raccoon comes out and attacks you if you open it. And then you get this huge story from Delilah if you hang out in the area of the cabin about the old guy that used to be the Firewatch for that post, and it's all about him only eating raccoons or something like that. It's just some big long story, and you're like, it goes on for minutes that you're listening to Delilah tell you about this story, and I'm like, how is her battery life on her radio not dying? Like, it was kind of ridiculous. So
cool. I did not get that. I guess I didn't hang out in the basement long enough. I just kind of figured that it was another Firewatch tower that was overtaken. Because when I asked her, what's going on here, I reported it, and she didn't call back or say anything. I figured, oh shit, did something really bad happen here that she doesn't feel right talking about? And I guess maybe that I just didn't hang out long enough to get the full story.
Or had you not responded quick enough several times, and so that's part of the storyline, and that you don't get her interaction because of,
maybe
friendship development, relationship
Maybe.
goals.
Yeah, I did not get attacked by the raccoon, so maybe that was the problem.
Yeah. You got to open up the oven next time.
I did. Nothing jumped out.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
It was weird. I was like, that seemed like it was going to be a thing, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
don't know what happened.
Well, moving right along. Once we get to that campsite and we see that it's ransacked, Delilah and Henry don't really know what to make of that. On Henry's way back, on your walk home from the campsite being ransacked, you come across a backpack, an old backpack, and inside is where you get your rope that sort of basically upgrades your mobility, as well as a disposable camera that has most of its film still left in it. It has a couple of pictures that have already been taken, but most of its film is left in it. Then Delilah explains what's going on there. It has the name Brian on it, and Henry asks, "Hey, who's Brian?" And then Delilah explains that before Henry was the fire lookout, there was a father and son combo named Ned, the dad, and Brian, the son. It's actually against the rules to have kids in the fire lookout towers, but Delilah deliberately lied about it to cover up because she liked Brian. She thought he was a cool kid. She says that Ned was kind of an asshole, but Brian was a really good kid, so she covers it up so that he can still be on the Firewatch tower.
Yeah, and as soon as I saw that backpack, I thought something terrible had happened. Honestly, because you don't end up with a backpack hanging from a tree. I'm like, did this kid fall off of a freaking cliff?
That's what
and get
I
his
thought
backpack
because of
stuck?
the rope that you see hanging above it.
Mm-hmm.
You see that one good rope hanging, and you can never get there. I was looking around, and that's how I came across the fence area. But yeah, you could never get up to the other piece of rope to see what had happened.
I wasn't really spooked by that because I've been hiking and been camping and been in places where people might accidentally leave their stuff, and like a pretty common thing to do is to sort of hang it at eye level so that people, if they're walking by or looking back for it, really can't miss it. Because this was within reach of an adult. It just wasn't within reach of the kid. It wasn't within reach of Brian.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just immediately went to the most ominous thing because Delilah mentions, 3 years ago, this kid Brian and his dad Ned, they were the lookouts, and then they just left one day. I don't know what happened. Ned was kind of a jerk. They probably just left. And I'm like, well,
Just
That's
super
not a
casual
setup.
about it. But yeah,
That's
they're
not a
just
setup.
going,
Hey,
hey Delilah, I found his backpack hanging from a fucking tree with like weird ropes that were dangling down towards it, but seemed like they didn't reach. Think that's suspicious? No? Okay, I guess we're gonna have this weird flirty conversation in the tower. Okay, that's weird. So what? At that point, you go home. I think later that night, Delilah like calls you up. I think drunk,
tries to come over.
or at least she talks about coming over.
Yeah.
I don't think coming over is ever an option. Like,
You're right. You never, ever get to see Delilah.
yeah. So she kind of. They have a weird relationship early on. She's
A weird
very
relationship the whole way through.
well, yeah, but it's extra. I think it's odd that like the first day she asks you, so what's fucked up about you? And why don't you guess what's fucked up about me? Because you have to be kind of fucked up to be out here for 80 days. Like, what are you trying to get away from? Which I thought was a pretty prescient question to ask, honestly. But
Yeah.
it was pretty insightful. But then from there, you're just like immediately fast buddies where you're going back and forth. And then there's like some weird sexual tension where she's asking like, hey, want me to, if I came over there, do you know what would happen? Like, what? I told you I'm married. Like, what? Okay, this is weird. So what did you guys think of Delilah at that point?
Very lonely and sexually frustrated.
Yeah.
That's basically what the whole story is. Everybody's lonely, everybody's sexually frustrated.
The whole story. I think we need to give him a little more credit than that.
Well,
I mean,
between
well,
Henry and Delilah.
Off. Yeah, you're not far off.
I thought the game. No, I'm going to say something nasty now, Billy.
All right,
So
go for
let me do that. I thought the game was just throwing another thing at the wall to see if it would stick that it wasn't really going to do anything with. That's what I thought about Delilah.
So sort of like dangling this like carrot in front of the player that's never actually going to manifest into anything.
No, not like an enticement. Like, ooh, maybe this game's going to explore sort of the mores of moving on from your wife in this sort of relationship with Delilah in a way that just never really paid off.
I thought that's where I thought it was going as well.
Yeah.
And I thought that they were doing that, but you can't, just because you've gone away and your wife is no longer around does not mean that history is not there anymore, and it doesn't mean that you can just escape away. So early on, at least, it seems like it makes sense for Henry and Delilah to let this kind of relationship have its space and not get into something, super physical or anything like that yet. But I thought that it made sense that for as much as Henry, you can play Henry to where he's like very desperate and he's thirsty. You could play Henry in that direction.
He's up on Yik Yak every night, just like, oh man, who's in the park tonight?
Oh, wow.
If only the app had existed.
Yes, hashtag skinny dipping. And he's like, oh, wow, I'll go check that out. But you can play him that way. You can also play him a little bit more reluctant, more distant. And I thought that I kind of played him in the middle ground. My version of Henry, I guess, was like a very loving husband. Like, I always tried to make things right in the relationship as best I thought I could in the early parts, when you're doing the little dialogue choices. And then by the time dementia starts setting in, I tried to make him kind of make the choices that would save his sanity. Like, taking care of your wife with dementia alone, like, as someone who has family members who deal with that, like, knowing what that looks like, at a certain point, it is very hard for someone who's not a professional to handle that just on a purely logistical level, let alone the emotional strain of dealing with someone who you've known for years, kind of becoming a shell of who they once were. So at that point, I was like, okay, Henry's probably going to try and move on. We're in this place. It's clear that Henry wants to move on. He wouldn't be here if he didn't want to move on. So I kind of played, a man torn.
Sure. And Gino, you're telling a nice story, but how many holes do you have to ask the player to fill in before you admit that the designers they didn't tie up any of these ends? They didn't explore any of these themes.
So if they don't plug up any of these themes, would they have left the options for the player? So there are moments where you have dialogue choices that I think fill in those gaps that you see, and you have to pick which one you want, or you can choose not to fill in any of them. But it seems like some of those holes are explored. And why don't you be more specific if there's something I'm not talking about?
I don't want to phrase this. I feel like they tried to tackle too many different ideas, and so they ended up doing a slipshod job of every one of them. So there was questions of PTSD, there's questions of alcoholism, there's questions of dementia, sort of when his wife stops being his wife and he can move on. Technically, they're still married. And you have all these things bouncing around. And I mean, the game's 4 hours. They don't really have time to deal with any of these, and so they don't.
I think we're going to circle back to Pete's criticisms, and I'm going to push
I'm
back
sure we
pretty
will.
hard. I'm going to push back pretty hard because
All right, man.
I think
I'm
that
ready.
you are seeing like a really important part of this game, but I'm actually going to say that you're not seeing a big enough picture.
I think the exterior reason is that Campo Santo was running out of money and needed to push their finished product. Honestly, that's from what it sounded like is that they had these great ideas and were developing the game, great artwork, great acting and all that stuff, but they couldn't get it finished and QA'd and polished enough in time to release the game they wanted, so they had to go with the game they had.
And that's certainly one answer. I thought that some of those themes in a game that's maximum time frame is 80 days, like you can only be in the park for 80 days. Like that's your Firewatch. That's when you're supposed to be there. To try to resolve all of these issues, I don't know that you could when all of them are things that you're going to have to go back home to. Like I don't know that Henry would. I don't know how you get over your wife getting dementia or how you figure out a plan for how to move on from it.
No, I don't want resolution. Resolution would be exactly as contrived as you're suggesting. What I want is examination, and there's no examination. There's just presentation.
Let's take a couple steps forward in the story. Get to some more stuff that Gino can, or that Pete can talk shit about,
Okay.
and then let's see if we can come to a grand conclusion here. So the next events in the story, so where we left off was, we find Brian's backpack. We hear about Brian and Ned, the previous Firewatch group. Delilah tells us about how she sort of covered up for them. Couple days in the Firewatch pass. Later, we find out that the teenage girls are reported missing. Henry and Delilah freak out. Henry says, hey, you know what? Like, we really need to kind of come clean about this, but, just kind of be vague.
Well,
Say that, like,
you can say a couple of different things.
Yeah. Well,
that's what I
think
chose to do.
I chose the vague option, but whatever you choose, it kind of doesn't matter. Sort of in this like telltale games kind of perspective. No matter what you choose, something's going to happen regardless. It just takes you on a slightly different path to get there. Delilah falsifies the report and says that neither Henry nor Delilah ever encountered the girls. So, she filed an official report, and in order to sort of deal with this, Delilah says, hey, Henry, you should just go, check out the lake and see if there's anything there. That motivates you to go to the lake, and you find some pretty important stuff. You find some stuff there, but it's not from the teens.
Isn't that after a couple of fast forwards? Like, isn't it calm for a while after you find the teens missing?
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
You have the scene where you talk in your sleep. And
yes,
you think you're talking to Julia, but you're actually talking to Delilah. Then Delilah mentions that it was kind of sweet that you called her. And then, like, after fast-forwarding several weeks, you're going down to the lake to fish.
Right.
Without a permit.
Yeah. They make a big deal about the permit.
Yeah.
Does the Firewatch code mean nothing anymore to anyone?
Let's back up a step. I didn't mean to go that far. You eventually do find some weird stuff at the lake, but let's get to that in a second. I did accidentally skip some stuff, and we should talk about the sleepwalking night where you're talking to Delilah and stuff like that. So we should hit on that a little bit.
Sure. What did you want to mention about it?
I think Pete would probably have the most things to say about it.
About what, the sleepwalking scene?
Like the sleepwalking night. Do you not have a problem with that?
No, whatever. I don't care about.
I thought that was fine. I thought that was good development.
Whatever. Like Gino said, I think it
feeds into the Peter's complaint about presentation without focusing too much on it.
All right, sure.
Focusing enough.
Let's just roll right along. Back to the lake.
Plays through it.
You skip forward like a bunch of days in your Firewatch. I think we're on like day like 60 something right now in the Firewatch. Say, I'm gonna go fishing down by the lake, and when you do that, you stumble across a couple of things. The first thing you find is a clipboard with what appear to be, like your transcribed, like interactions with Delilah. Someone has like written down the things that you've been saying back and forth, including some of the intimate things. if you have chosen to do those, including some of the things like hey, let's not
fabricate the report.
Right,
Contact
yeah.
report.
It's like there's been some stuff on that clipboard that would be kind of incriminating and damaging towards both Henry and Delilah. He gets on the walkie-talkie with her and says, hey, what's up with this? He stumbles around a little bit, finds a camera on the ground, and then bam, somebody knocks him out from behind.
He finds a radio.
Oh,
The
yeah,
radio
a
on the
radio.
ground.
A radio on the ground. I misspoke when I said camera. He finds another walkie-talkie on the ground, then someone hits him from behind. When he wakes up, the clipboard's gone, the radio's gone. The only thing that he can remember really is the letterhead on the clipboard, which said, I'm going to fuck up the name, like
Wapiti Station.
Wapiti Station. It says Wapiti Station on it. You ask Delilah about it. She's like, God, there's this place called Wapiti Meadow. Is that the same thing? And you eventually start looking for that. Well, both Henry and Delilah get freaked out about what happened. Obviously, I mean, if I were Henry, I would get freaked out. Somebody just beat me with a fucking head, and knocked me unconscious.
And was taking notes of everything I've been saying.
Yeah. So realistically, Henry and Delilah are both freaked out right now. And so Delilah says, go to this place, figure out what's going on. So up until this point, all we've had is this interaction with the teens, chatter with Delilah, one like random encounter with some guy on a cliff who we really can't interact with, on our way back from the lake one time, and now this. It's been like 2 months in the Firewatch, and this is really all we get. But at this point in the story is where things kind of take a big turn.
Yeah, and I want to talk about this turn.
Okay.
Can I talk about this turn?
Go for it.
Yeah.
You
All
take
right,
us through.
before I talk about this turn, I want to ask a question. So for like a few moments, I actually thought to myself, like, oh my God, it's his wife. She's not in Australia anymore. Somehow she traveled to this national park and she's doing all this. Did anybody else have a moment like that?
No.
No, I didn't think that she was
That
the
was
mastermind.
But
1 in 4 players thinks it's the wife.
but setting that aside, this is the turn. Like, this is the part that made me the angriest about this game. Because it's taking all these things the game's been discussing. His wife's dementia and her decline, his relationship with her, his burgeoning relationship with Delilah. What does he do? How does he juggle all these competing emotions? And then just says, fuck it. Forget that stuff. This is a thriller now. There's a murder in the park. We got to track him down. Let's become Crime Stoppers. And I was just like, oh my God. Like, you're trying to set up this story and then you just say, nope, never mind.
I'm again going to push back later.
Okay, we're going to circle
I'm going to
back.
push back now.
All right, Gino, go hard.
I'm not pushing back that hard. I think that this turn actually disappointed me a whole lot.
Yes.
When it became a thriller, mostly because as someone who knows a thing or two about radios and who looked at the map, like, Wapiti is not hard to find. It's on the map. It's there. It makes no sense that, like, the head of this place would have no clue what Wapiti Station is. It also makes very little sense to me that they would be like, how could someone be listening to our conversations? You're on a radio.
Yeah. It's
everything you say can be intercepted if someone felt like it. It's not like impossible.
No one, does the average civilian know about, how to intercept radio or get on the same frequencies?
No, but I just always assume, like, hey, you're in this park. There are other Firewatch towers, right?
Yeah.
There are rangers who are also ostensibly using radios to communicate. It could be anyone. Like, any of these people who have radios could be doing this if they felt like it.
Yeah.
And so it didn't seem to me like something... Like, she went from 0 to 100 real quick.
Yeah.
And she's like, something is happening. Oh, my God. We got to find out what it is. Figure it out. Go, Henry. Go run
Her
over
stress
there.
plays into Henry's reaction so hard.
Yeah.
Like,
and
she... obviously it's the player controlling Henry, but I feel like if I had been Henry, I would have been like, whoa, hold on. Let's slow this down a little bit.
Yeah,
Let's burn it to the ground.
Yeah, when she gets to this time, it's just like, fuck it. Burn it all.
all right, hang on. We're taking too many steps ahead.
But that is my my big problem at that point is when it decides to become a thriller, the mechanics of why it is a thriller are things that are common knowledge to me. And so me as a person with this knowledge, it doesn't work as a thriller because I know that some of these things are not suspicious or they're not things that should be so disconcerting.
What about the part where you get your head bashed in?
That sucks. That's the part that I'm like,
would
yeah,
that
I understand being pissed
would
about
that not incite like a thriller aspect?
Yes, but that's not what Delilah thinks you're like lying about getting. She's like, are you on mushrooms? Have you eaten mushrooms? Like, that's funny. You can do it. But if you're on mushrooms, tell me you're on mushrooms because this is really freaky.
Gino, these are all excellent points you're making. I just want to be clear, though, so we're all on the same page, that they're parallel to the criticism I'm making. The quality of the thriller is irrelevant to me. It's just the fact that they made this thriller turn at all.
I think it's okay that they made the thriller turn. I just wish it was in service of Delilah and Henry's relationship growing.
Which it isn't.
Which it isn't. It becomes the A plot.
Yes.
When that happens, and I feel like that kind of distracts from the other. It kind of distracts from the more compelling storylines that I thought were developing before that. So I'm in agreement with you.
Okay.
I just found the idea of changing genre to not be so odious unto itself.
Okay, fair enough.
So from there, you go to Wapiti Station. You find it. It's this fenced-in station. You can't get in because you don't have the tools. So you go to a fireman's camp where there's a fire line that's been basically burned around a nearby river to stop fire from getting to Wapiti Station.
They're making a fire line.
They're making a fire line, but when you get there, you find a note that says that this fire line has been burned in place in order to preserve Wapiti Station. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
So
yeah, that's true. There's like a little note.
Missed that note.
There's a little note in the like where you get the fire axe from that says, "Hey, just let the manager know we did this per request of Dr. So-and-so at Wapiti Station to preserve the research."
Yeah.
There was like a little note. It wasn't that big.
So these fire people who are in the park doing work that Delilah's been in communication with and helping coordinate have been doing this work on behalf of this station that she does not know.
Yeah.
So I was starting to feel like, okay, something's up beyond the like someone's listening to our conversation.
Not to mention, I think we blew by it, but at one point you do hear a conversation that you're not necessarily supposed to be privy to, I guess, but she left like her radio active, so you get one half and it's really suspect. Anyway, moving on.
Yes. And on the way to the fireman's lookout point, you find some snowmobiles and they've been stripped for parts. Which I found really suspicious.
And one ski.
One ski.
There's some
But
weird stuff
there's
going on.
no explanation for the ski, but whatever.
There's some weird stuff going on. Taking some steps for, like, basically the only thing that's happening right now is just, like, weird shit is occurring in the game, and it's there to make the player feel like something's fishy. Something's going on here. I got to get to the bottom of this. And I'm going to agree with maybe, like, I don't know, somewhere between Pete and Gina where it's kind of getting, like, forced here. I did get a little bit annoyed at how sort of forced the mystery was. But let's go into the research station. We take this axe, we use it to break into the research station, and what do we find? We find a bunch of surveillance equipment that seems to be pretty inert other than beeps and boops. We go into the main tent. We find nobody there. We don't really find any actual evidence of people. I mean, we see like
you find
see
their
some
clothes,
stuff.
you find their cots, you find their research,
Gear.
you find notes,
You
find
find
all their
some
gear.
stuff.
People
but
are living there at one point. But
I
not
think
presently.
this moment in the game was where I started to see, like, wait, what's actually going on here? I realized that whole thing was a setup.
Same.
And it was. Actually, the thing that sort of made it very,
Why
very
are they
clear.
researching Henry and Delilah.
Yeah,
It's ludicrous.
that was dumb. Like, and then the actual thing that made me realize it was the main plot thing that you find in the tent there is that there's this binder with some notes about Henry and Delilah. And you take them both, and you can read them and says, like, hey, like, Delilah has these stats, like liar, alcoholic. She's, can't be trusted. She's like a manipulator. What is her rating so that we can manipulate her? And they give her like a score. Then they have one for Henry too. And it's like almost like a sheet of like, how could we study this person? What's odd is that there's literally just one page for Henry, one page for Delilah, and the rest of the binder's empty. There's no actual research around. Yeah. And so I thought to myself, if they were actually being researched, there'd be way more here. And this place does not look like it looks like a setup, and it was.
And my tip was when they had a soil grid out in front of their tent.
Yeah.
And if the research is supposed to be on human suggestion,
who builds
why
a
would you have
table?
a soil grid? Yeah, like why would you?
Why do you have a sand table?
Why do you have a sand
table?
table?
We need a 5-paragraph op order for this,
Yeah, why is this grid here? Like, this looks like soil research. It sure does, but
what internal review board approves this experiment? Who's like, yes, you know what? The United States has a great history of experimenting on unknowing participants. That's worked out fine. Let's keep it up.
On top of that, hey, we've got this, it looks like a barometer. Yeah, we totally need that to tell if like these two people on the radio can be subliminally controlled. We need a barometer and we need a seismograph
and wind gauge.
There's just some really inert research stuff. Like, it's completely harmless. And I'm going to circle back to this, but Henry and Delilah both like fuel the fire of this conspiracy.
And on top of it,
they freak out.
So when I was after the game was over, I wanted to see if I missed an ending or something else. It seemed like the kind of game where decisions might change things, and I found some videos that were kind of analyzing Delilah, and so this pointed it out to me. Delilah's watchtower is actually completely visible from Wapiti Station.
Yeah.
So she has a direct eye line to the station, which means that if people are going in and out of there and watching them and listening to them, Delilah would be able to see it happening the whole time.
Wait, can you actually see Delilah's watchtower from Wapiti Station?
Closer to Wapiti Tower or Wapiti Station than she is to your Henry's tower.
And she has said that she can see into your tower and see you. So it's clear that she can see shit.
Exactly.
But I feel like both the characters mentioned, like, it's kind of down in this valley. It makes sense why none of the other watchtowers can see it. Like,
hers can. There's a line of sight. There's a line of sight. You can actually see her tower from the tent, from outside of the tent, or like around the tent.
I don't even want to have. Well, I'm going to keep complaining. Whatever. I don't even want to have this discussion about what Delilah knows, right? Because this is the crux. This is the only thing. I think people. I shouldn't say that. Now I'm being dismissive. I don't want to be dismissive. But if the crux of your story is this question of what Delilah knows, that's uninteresting storytelling. That's lowest common denominator storytelling.
I'm going to agree with Pete.
That's what the game devolved into.
Oh, no, it's not.
All right. Okay, well, we're going to have this argument.
So, I think, my pushback is I think that if that was the only question, I think that would be. But if you assume that she knows more than she says she does, why is she not telling you anything? And in service of what? Why would she be lying to you? Why would she be deliberately obfuscatory? That's the question that then I found interesting, rather than what does she know?
So we got to advance a little bit. Some things that happen while you're at Wapiti Station. You get 2 important points. One, you find this device that replaces your compass mechanically. It is designed to find any kind of signal. It's basically like a transceiver or transponder or something that can just like say, hey, there's a signal coming from this direction, and it gets like it like beeps faster when you get closer to it. So it helps you find device. Yeah, it's a tracking device essentially. And then you also have a dialogue point where both of you are freaking out, and Delilah suggests burning down the camp. As you leave, like you eventually talk Delilah down off of that ledge. But as you leave the camp, someone or something sets fire to it anyway.
So at this point, do you have the new walkie-talkie yet?
No.
Okay.
No. So everyone,
a lot of master plan hasn't gone into effect yet.
Everyone freaks out. You start using this device, what you call it, to find a couple of things.
Yeah, Delilah does. Burn this motherfucker down.
Yeah.
Burn it down.
Do you find the keys to the cave before you find the walkie-talkie?
No,
Get
I
the new
think
walkie-talkie?
You get the new walkie-talkie first.
And then,
Which,
okay.
again,
Whatever the order doesn't matter.
walkie-talkies work on radio frequencies. It doesn't matter which one you have.
Nope.
You can just set the one you have to a new frequency.
We're beating that
Or
horse to
it's-
death. Let's just get off of that.
Encryption.
Moving forward, we have a
Military
little bit of
stuff.
this game to go through before we actually can talk about what's actually going on here.
Nothing.
So, many days go by in the Firewatch. You get this call from Delilah to say, "Hey," and her tone's very different, very suspiciously different. "Hey, do you see a point on your map? I'm not going to tell you what it is, but just go to that.
Go to
point."
the tree at this location.
Yeah, whatever. She's basically trying to tell you to go somewhere without using the walkie-talkie. You go find this spot. There's like a ranger cache there. You find a new walkie-talkie. For all intents and purposes, from the story perspective, you have a clear, untapped line of communication with Delilah. Okay, cool. Shit's good again.
Another question there. The place where your walkie-talkie, she drops it off for you, is past your point.
Yeah.
See,
Like,
this
it's
one,
on,
yeah, keep going, Gino. Because
it's on the path. Literally, to put something in that lockbox, she would have had to walk past your watch point, put it in that lockbox, and walk all the way back.
She didn't say that she put it there. She said that it took her a lot of effort and strings to pull to get it there.
But even assuming, and I'm angry at myself for participating in this, but now I'm going to. Even if she did put it in there, I don't find that particularly problematic, because the point is, I don't think she wants whoever's surveilling the two of them to know that they have an alternative means of communication. She wants that to be a secret so they can communicate without.
Even though the instant
people
silence on the normal radio
Yeah,
network
tip them off
will.
anyway.
Yeah.
Look, Delilah's a moron. We've established
Get
that.
past this stuff. Let's just
But
get
if you-
past this.
But if you have this alternative means of communication, why not just drop it off his damn door?
'Cause then
I
they
don't
play
want to
that.
talk about this anymore.
Yes,
This is
I guess.
not important. We're going to get to what's really important about this game in a little bit.
You don't get to decide what's important.
So
you tell me what's really
we
important.
advance, we use our little tracking device to find a bunch of shit. Someone is leaving things for us and putting little device on them so that we will find them. Someone wants us to find things, and we don't think it's Delilah right now. Maybe you guys did, but I didn't think it was somebody else. So we
I thought it was
find
Ned.
right. We find keys to a cave. There's like earlier on in the game when we're leaving the lake after confronting the drunk teens, we pass through this cave and we see a gate that we can't open. We get the keys to go into
Chekhov's cave.
Whatever. We go through this cave now. We have access to go into this cave. We're keeping Delilah in the loop about it. We go to this cave. Someone locks the door behind us after we go into the cave. We get kind of spooked. We can't call Delilah because the radio doesn't work in the cave. Couple things happen in this cave. You say you can't find Delilah, the person locks you, but also while you are passing through the cave, you can look down and see a shoe.
Dude, just get to it. We don't need to know everything in the cave.
Fine, okay, you leave, more spooky shit happens, you get access to
You find Brian's hideout.
You find Brian's hideout.
Yeah.
Okay? You find out more about Brian and Ned. You're learning more about Brian and Ned from Delilah through their interactions. You find Brian's hideout. Here you get your next mobility upgrade. You get these like studs, these little anchors that you can put into rocks that you can create your own rope points, but they're also very scripted where you can put those. It lets you go down further into the cave. Okay? Down there, you find basically only one important thing. It's Brian's body.
Dun, dun, dun.
Brian somehow fell or was murdered or pushed or whatever conspiracy theory you want. He's dead at the bottom of the cave. His body's been there for a while. It's decomposing. You tell Delilah this. She's destroyed. And like this is about as far as we get right now before I want to go forward.
Yeah, I found that moment really impactful. So up until this point, you get the camera early on, and Delilah will say, like, hey, take some pictures here and there at certain points. I tried to use the camera to take pictures of, sunsets, things that I thought were cool, which I thought that that was a mechanic we actually didn't talk about too much. I thought that the idea of having a camera with limited film actually made me appreciate the environment a lot more because I had a finite number of pictures, even if it's not a screenshot. I assumed that at the end it might be screenshots or something. But the idea that these are the finite pictures that Henry can be taking, I tried to use them sparingly and always look for things that I'd want to take a picture of. And at that moment, when I knew that it was Brian's bag with his camera in it, I was afraid that those pictures would be
confiscated.
Or something, like, I would know something was terrible, something terrible had happened to him because those 3 pictures that were already taken were pictures of something. Because I think you start with 17. And I'm like, okay, someone took 3 pictures. One of these is going to be them, like, Bioshock style, that there's, like, blood on the wall, and it's, like, the last thing they did right before they die.
Right.
I figured that it would be, like, the camera from right before he died.
So,
but
in the story...
I was like, do I take a picture of this or not?
In the story, some stuff diffuses. You find out that those teens that were missing, that you were freaking out about, just got drunk and landed in jail and kind of got, like...
They stole a tractor.
Yeah, they stole a tractor. All right, they're fine. You guys are off the hook for the fucking teens being maybe dead or lost, okay?
They were shitty teens.
Yeah. So we were only dealing with this, like, tracking device and the fact that Brian is dead, and actually there's, like, really nothing on your plate. And so a lot of the Firewatch continues, you're basically right at the end. Now, unfortunately, the fire that was started at the research facility mixed with the first fire that you see has gotten out of control, and you guys are both freaking out a little bit because someone's probably going to get fired for this.
Or die.
They're going to get literally fired.
So you see basically one last interaction with your tracking device, and you find a cassette tape that has an explanation from Ned. You really don't get to hear from Ned until this point in the game, at least not so directly, but Ned says something to the effect of, hey, look, I know you saw Brian, like, it was an accident, man, like, we didn't mean for that shit to happen, and don't come looking for me, I just want to be in the wilderness, I'm going to go deeper into the Shoshone, the fire made me had to leave, you're going to see everything when you get there, because he basically points you to the path that leads you to Ned's hideout.
Yeah, and here's the next massive theme that Firewatch isn't going to deal with, the responsibility of parents for their children. How do you balance the competing impulses of pushing them, asking them to challenge themselves, acquire new skills versus the need to protect them and care for them? How does even PTSD impact these sort of things? Let's not worry about that. Let's deal with this thriller. What does Delilah know?
So the last bit of the game is you...
I think the answer is don't do what Ned did.
Yeah, don't do what Ned did.
That's their feedback on that.
You're not sure if Ned killed Brian. I think there's some pretty compelling evidence to suggest that maybe he didn't, push the kid off a cliff, but forced him to do something that he didn't want to do because there was evidence to suggest that Brian had no interest in climbing, and it was clearly a climbing accident that killed Brian.
I think we could say reckless indifference, manslaughter.
Fine.
Endangerment. Yeah.
That's what Law and Order's told me.
You gotta forgive me for just, like, running through this story so fast, but we're, like, on the last day of the Firewatch. You find out all this shit from Ned's camp, and
in Ned's hideout,
there's
my boombox was there. He stole it from me.
He stole your boombox.
That's what tripped me.
Somehow the boombox appeared, even though I had thrown it in the lake.
His most heinous crime.
That was like, I had my boombox. I'm like, oh, sweet, I'm going to have tunes this whole summer. We'll see what happens. And the boombox is gone the next day. And that's where it was. Ned came into... You know what the real crime was?
That's what I do. It's a fiend.
Before Ned even did any nefarious shit, he had broken in, stolen my boombox in the dead of night.
So...
He's a murderer.
And he was once a fire watcher. What about his code? The oath he took.
We find...
Blood in, blood out. Firewatch.
We find out that it was Ned the whole time setting up all the events throughout Firewatch. Ned had the beer cans Ned had a janked up typewriter that he was trying to fabricate that story of us being researched. None of that shit was actually happening. It was all Ned the whole time. He was basically just trying to get us to get the fuck off of his backyard and scare Henry and Delilah, because Henry saw Ned, and to Ned he got freaked out because somebody saw him. So
and I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for that meddling Firewatch.
It was basically one step removed from a Scooby-Doo mystery, except the thing he's trying to cover up is that he killed his son, accidentally killed his son.
It's like an actual crime.
All right.
It's not like a raincoat business.
This is the very last thing that I want to talk about, the actual events of the game, and then we can talk about what all this shit means. On the last day, when you're getting evac because the fire's out of control, you are progressing towards a rendezvous point, a pickup point. And you're talking with Delilah. Your guys' relationship is kind of shaky, especially if you had pursued the sort of romantic interest route. You're not quite sure where either of you stand because you got this emergency situation. The Firewatch has come to an end, and you have the opportunity to sort of convince Delilah to stay behind and wait for you. Did you guys both ask her to stay, or all of you ask her to stay?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, oh wait, Jim, what did you say?
I did not. I told her to get
I
out.
tried. I figured even if it wasn't a romantic situation, it's probably the right thing to do. You've left your second in command, or the person you're in charge of, is running over to your station for evac. You should probably wait for them.
Right.
It's just common courtesy.
So, no matter what you choose, when you get there, Delilah's not there. She did not wait for you. And you just sort of hear from her, and she's sort of apologetic, yeah, sorry, I didn't wait. You can have some other, what seems like important dialogue, where you sort of have the opportunity to say, hey, do you want to, after all this is over, meet up in Boulder, Colorado, where I live? And she's like, maybe, perhaps, possibly, gives you a really non-committing answer. And then you just hop in the helicopter, and the game fucking ends.
Get on the chopper.
You get in the chopper, game fucking ends. So,
If it bleeds, we can kill it.
At a very superficial level, yeah, they just did not finish this game. At a very superficial level, yeah. So we've gotten through all the events of Firewatch.
I don't think that's true.
Yeah, I kind of
hang on. I'm going to go back on those words in a second.
Okay.
But at
lay your rhetorical trap.
At first look, yeah, it didn't really have very good of an ending.
I disagree. I found the ending the most compelling thing. That ending where you're sitting in the chair, the most compelling thing about the game since they went on the thriller path. When the thriller visage is cut away.
Dropped.
Yes, when Michael Jackson's Thriller stops playing, I find, because at that point it's once you're talking to Delilah and saying, "Hey, wait for me," it's this discussion about their relationship again instead of the pragmatism of we need to figure out what the hell's happening in Shoshone. And that's where that was when I was compelled by this game, was when like you said, Pete, it's a discussion of how do you move on after a loved one suffers some sort of tragedy? What's the appropriate response? What do you do as someone in your 40s who is lonely? What do you do with that time? All of a sudden it became about that again. Yeah. And so even though it was abrupt, I thought that it was necessarily abrupt because it's the end of... They're not going to end up together. No. Delilah seems like she's not
the
necessarily...
Yeah. There can be no resolution, and so there isn't.
And I think that's a very real kind of way to end it, in that in real life, nothing ever really truly gets resolved. It's not a movie where you get a nice little bow tie at the end of every little plot point wrapping up in a nice, neat package. It's you got dropped out there, you do your life, you have all these wacky, wild adventures, Thrilla in Manila, and then you get to the end and it's, okay, well, you got to go back to your real life now.
Yeah.
Later.
You can't look her up on Facebook.
Right.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah. Mark Zuckerberg has not come up with the idea yet, so...
I think Pete is ready to rip this game apart, if he hasn't already enough.
I think I've made my piece. I agree with you guys. I think the ending was the most compelling part of the entire game. So I'm not even going to say second half. I'll say second 3/4. But it's just... So I have a nice phrase, so I'm going to use it. I think it's indicative of the perniciousness of low expectations. I think the only context in which Firewatch can be called a good story or quality storytelling is when your expectations are already low for storytelling in video games.
I don't know.
I don't know. I think that's a little too harsh.
Hey man, I'm all about hot takes. Throwing them out.
I'm ready to.
We can only have one hot taker. We can only have one. Because then when you have two, you have first take, and that no one wants that.
I claim it for this podcast. Then I get to be hot take guy for this podcast.
That's fine.
All right. This episode at least.
I think some of the storytelling in the early portion and then that final wrap up. So what made it compelling for me was after the game was over, I looked up some of the Delilah stuff and what people were saying about kind of her inconsistencies. And I was wondering, so if you take that she knows more than she's letting on, she's not telling Henry the whole truth of what she could be seeing. Like, she sees Wapiti Station from her. She can see Wapiti Station. She can know if someone's going in or out. If you're walking around Wapiti Station and all of a sudden it goes up in flames after you finish talking to her, I would assume that she's got a binocular on the station and she can see Ned run up and light it on fire. Like, those are things that she can probably see.
Yeah.
So if she is doing that, why? If she's lying or if she's telling half-truth, why is she doing it?
To protect Ned.
Yep.
Yes.
That's something I didn't think of until just now, but I'm wondering if she does have a reaction or a relationship with Ned because of all the conversations not all, the one conversation she has. I think she's with Ned in playing you.
Yeah.
You know?
That's
and
what I
that
was
might
thinking.
be. Yeah.
That just ain't it, man.
What?
That's just not it.
Well,
What do you think then?
We're gonna. All right, I have to just dump this all out now.
Okay.
Okay,
Fine.
so
I'm going to yell at you as you go, probably.
go for it, man. But just let me say my piece. It's gonna take a few minutes to just roll with me here.
All right, man.
Firewatch is this multi-layered narrative. I'm gonna say just a bunch of hot bullshit. Just get rid of it.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mute my microphone and tell me when I'm allowed to talk again.
Firewatch is a multi-layered narrative about the tragedy of human experience. And I know Peter sort of vomited his mouth a little bit. And it uses themes of escapism to do that. All right? So let's examine, I think there's 4 major characters in this game. There is Henry, there's Delilah, there's Ned, and Brian. Right? 3 out of these...
No one cares about Ron.
3 out of these four characters...
Or Dave.
...have very clear... very clear character development points that involve alcohol. Right? These people have had bad history with alcohol. All these people have stuff that they are running from in their lives. For Delilah, it's fuck-ups that she's had in her past relationships. She's lied to a bunch of people, especially her family members, and gotten caught in some of those lies, and she's ruined some relationships, and she is doing this whole Firewatch thing to run from that. Henry is trying to escape the trauma that he's experiencing with his wife, and wants to go to this Firewatch place so he can get his mind off of that stuff. He is dealing with a problem that he does not want to deal with anymore, so he runs away. Ned is a very clear alcoholic, also PTSD war veteran.
So Delilah says.
But I think we have to sort of just believe, at least in some bit, because we get evidence that's non-Delilah generated that he did not have he did not have stewardship of Ned until Ned's grandma died.
Brian.
Sorry, Brian. Until Brian's grandma died, and then he sort of had to take custody back of Brian. And he's not ready to do dad stuff. He cannot handle it. Ned, I think, Ned is actively running by staying and going further into the wilderness. He met a problem both with his PTSD and with Brian's death, and he's running into the wilderness to avoid it. Brian himself runs away, and Brian is mostly a victim in this case, because nothing that Brian is facing in his life he has any control over. He's in many senses the victim. So how does Brian run away? He goes into his imagination and his fantasy worlds, and we see that specifically in his hideout, which is itself a hideaway place, but it's where he sort of constructs this fantasy world around him as like a shield, as like a guard. Every single one of these characters
he draws a castle.
He draws a castle. He's got his
builds a castle.
He's got his like Wizards and Wyverns, which is like a D&D playoff character sheet. Like, you see that he is diving into fantasy to escape reality. Delilah, Henry are using this trip as a form of escapism. Ned is going into the wilderness to run away from Brian's death and his PTSD. Brian himself is using fantasy and fiction and his imagination to escape his problems. Every person that has major plot points around them in this game is confronted with problems in life, and instead of dealing with them, they choose to run away. That is the overarching theme here of people having their problems, facing them.
No one's disputing that.
Right. And then they run away. And the game itself, here's where I'm probably going to step outside of my own like sort of safe zone here, is we are now also playing a game. That games are frequently used as escapism. This is why I think this is actually multi-layered, right? There's a lot of shit going on that says people run away from their problems, and there's this element, this theme of escapism. This makes a lot of sense now. Why do Henry and Delilah drum up all this conspiracy? They need it to distract them from the shitty lives that they have. So yeah, of course, when they see the first sign of any kind of sort of conspiracy theory, they're going to blow it out of proportion because they need that. They need some sort of grand narrative to escape. So they're going to drum it up and make it seem like more than it is. But at the end of the Firewatch, they have to go back to their shitty lives. And sort of like the whole fantasy is broken. And that's why they're never going to actually meet. And Delilah doesn't actually stay and wait for you. She's running from you too. Because you're just going to be another bad relationship probably for Delilah. Like, there's just so much shit going on that
better as a voice on a radio.
That connects and makes sense. Like, I think now, once I had examined this game deeply, in sort of our deep listens fashion, I understand that all this shit that seemed disconnected and sort of contrived now is elegantly woven into this grander theme.
It's woven. I don't know about elegance. So, Pete, you
I've just been shaking my head for like steadily. Yeah. Well, first off,
Yeah.
Billy just proceeded to just list a series of barely connected things that this game does, which was my pretty much main criticism from the beginning. But second point, Billy, I bet if you named a novel, and it's a novel I had read, I could tell you a story about how it's really about escapism. Like, I was just running through ones in my head. Farewell to Arms, Sun Also Rises, Moby fucking Dick. Pick a Jane Austen novel. I could probably do that one too. Like, to say that this is a grand tale of escapism is just a trite sort of summation.
If you compare it to great works of literature, you're right. But what other video games have done this?
Pick a movie, and I could tell you it's the story of this game. Pick any piece of media, and I could probably tell you.
Castaway?
Trying to escape from the island.
Look,
Black Hawk Down.
I had to get that shit out. And yeah, you know what, Pete, you're right. Like, I'm not very well read in terms of literature. So yeah, I will grant you. I bet you every other book on the shelf does this. I don't think every other game on the shelf does this. It doesn't take this sort of critical look at itself, what it's actually doing.
I think that comes back to Pete's point of lowered expectations, that because this is trying to do anything, it is more critical than a lot of games that exist right now. Just because it's interested in these questions at all, let alone exploring them to the full depth that they might deserve. And yeah, I guess I'm somewhere still in between on these two hot takes.
Yeah.
I wish that it did more. I'm on Pete's side where I wish that it did more with those themes. But I think where I come to it is, if you assume Delilah is covering for Ned, why is she covering for Ned? Well, she doesn't seem to like Ned all that much from her descriptions of him. It seems like she doesn't enjoy the fact that she would not enjoy him being out there. And how, over 3 years of 3 separate Firewatches, has she never seen this dude wandering through the fucking woods And it seems like he's stealing shit from Wapiti Station. Like, that's where a lot of his resources come from. So how could she have never seen him going in there and then leaving with stuff? That seems odd to me.
Ned explains in some stuff that you find in his campsite that he has like a very specific checklist of get what I need this much supplies to survive the winter, I need to go borrow that equipment and make sure that I put it all back. And, you know...
But I don't mean, like, people catching him... I don't mean catching him with having the stuff or, like, people noticing the stuff being missing. I mean Delilah physically seeing him walking around this gigantic park. Like, she has line of sight on a lot of the territory that Ned is walking in. And Delilah frickin' sees you wandering all over the place multiple times. Like, she'll see you from her park bench. So with all of that in place, it makes me think that she is hiding all of this so that because she might think that something happened to Brian and she can't bear to know it.
Or that sour grapes of a relationship with Ned.
Yes. Or that they had something more.
Right.
With Ned and Delilah?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm kind of coming from. If you get in deep, you think, like, you know, she was really into Ned and then got spurned after he basically up and disappeared on her. And so that's why she can't connect to Henry necessarily. She thought she had something good going. She really likes Brian, but then because of Brian and Ned's disappearance, what she thought she had, she lost, and now it's become a, oh my God, he's a horrible guy, he's terrible. You know, it colored her perception of the man originally.
That makes sense. I didn't think of it like she would have gotten to know Brian through Ned because they had a relationship.
Right.
I always thought it was because Brian, it was like a, you know, someone like a babysitter getting to know the kid they're babysitting.
Right.
And kind of getting an affection for them.
Right. But if Brian wasn't the one on the radio, how would she have communicated with Brian other than being there in person?
Yeah. And it seems like she does not necessarily hike. It's a long hike.
Yeah.
Once you actually have to do it. So that made me think, okay, since Delilah is, I think she's hiding this stuff, what does that say about her and her need to escape her past specifically? Like, what is that? Is she then kind of up to something? Is she feeling this guilt about what happened to Brian? Does she not want to find out, and that's why she's keeping Henry from those places? Where is Henry in all this? Is he still feeling for Julia? Like, you don't really get to know how he feels about his wife. Like, you know that he's conflicted, but you don't know what his ultimate...
Really? Because I kind of got a very definitive
that
termination that he was going to go back to her.
Yeah,
unless
Delilah
that's just kind of that's more of a line of dialogue as opposed to an actual like alternate ending. Unlike if you hang around Delilah's tower for over 2 minutes, the helicopter flies off and leaves you behind.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and then story ends. Like if you hang out for 2 minutes, around 2 minutes in front of the chopper will fly away and boom, cut to black. Credits roll.
Wow, that's weird.
Yeah, like no change in the ending, in the like, you know, how they wrap it up. Just I guess you're not going to show up for the chopper, so you're dead.
Huh?
Yeah, and
well,
that was
Henry.
The thing that at the end of the game when you have to get to Delilah's watchtower, that I actually got pretty anxious because I get really. I don't know. I have an anxiety when like places are about to close, and I feel like I'm going to be locked in or left behind. I don't know why, but the idea that being left behind in this place, like I was
terrifying.
It was terrifying to me, and so it was kind of hard because the game prompts you. Like I feel like there's stuff left behind that I need to still find, and Henry will say that to himself or say that to Delilah, and I. Feeling the way I did not want to explore, even though I knew it was a game and I knew that I probably would be allowed that time. just the idea of being trapped in a blaze, and they do a great job of changing the environment dynamically as the fire is, like, as stuff is getting more and more dangerous and more obscured. They also up the level of smoke in the environment. All of a sudden your eye lines start changing. There's fire, like you can see smolder, and so that made me feel like I need to get the hell out of this place. There are probably answers to be had, but I'm not going to die looking for them.
And that's the one thing I think we all have to agree on is that regardless of the storyline necessarily, it's extremely well acted. The voice acting is on point for the most part. The artwork and the
aesthetic style
is amazing. It's
Ollie Moss,
great.
I believe, he led that, and
great
dude's really great.
Artwork and stuff, and
there's good music, subtle good music.
Yeah.
I have no problems with the game aesthetic.
There's a lot that this game has going for it. All the points of contention come from, I think, the story.
Right.
Yeah. So, Pete, did you find any of that argument compelling?
No, honestly, it was
fine.
a valiant argument, but I still think it's so based on the thriller aspects of the story and sort of this, almost criminal profiling of Delilah in such a way that I just didn't find particularly compelling. And I think it returns a little bit back to my original question, is how many holes can you ask the player to fill in before you just admit that there's not a lot of story there?
I think one thing that's cool, this is kind of getting sort of self-examining, is that it's kind of refreshing that for once the three of us, and Jim included, are actually taking 3-4 very different perspectives on a particular game. I mean, we have taken different stances before, but I think we're going in 3 real different directions, at least three real different directions at the end of this game. That's kind of good. If nothing else, I mean, maybe Pete is not a very positive direction. I mean, maybe he didn't get a lot of utility out of it. I'm not saying
very
that
positive.
I mean, I'm not
super negative.
All right, Pete's taking a super negative direction. I drank the fucking Kool-Aid apparently, and Gino and Jim are sort of examining character behaviors. All right, but that's still really different directions. And if we take a step back and say, hey, a game can have 3 really different responses from its players with such a very narrow set to offer, that's kind of cool.
I think that's a good point. I think that definitely in all of this, usually we either me and Pete or me and Billy tend to fall on the same side of things, and I think actually being stuck in the middle, because I am definitely disappointed with some of the story elements of this game. But at the end of the day, I think that the graphics, just the aesthetic of everything, did a whole heck of a lot. The setting did a lot for me, and I just wish that they didn't do the thriller thing.
Yeah.
There were so many different things. I wish they were just having conversations about life for 80 days. I wish that you were stuck in this place, or they're real thirsty and they can't get to each other because their job doesn't let them.
Yeah, and then you have a nice metaphor of we have both these physical and emotional barriers. Okay, what are we doing there?
Yeah, I wanted it to end with Henry just I'm skinny. I'm taking off my pants and going into the lake.
Wow.
And
what are
you
you
should
doing,
watch Delilah.
He becomes a mermaid and sails into the distance.
Oh, man.
I want to throw down, I think, my last word here,
Do it.
which is that, I took a stance that is pretty characteristic of who I am. Outside of this game, Gino said earlier before the podcast started, you need to take a stance on substance dualism here in this podcast. Well,
I didn't say that. I never asked for that.
So-
Don't put that evil on me.
So a lot of my philosophical background involves me having a worldview, having a theme that just sort of makes everything fit with some mystical bullshit. We don't know why, right? And so likewise,
Socrates did.
I took the stance of this game, the reading, the interpretation of this game that sort of just makes everything click. Is it mystical bullshit? Probably, but that's how I read the game, and that is the kind of person and the player that I am. So it doesn't make it's not out of bounds. So yeah, am I off the mark? Perhaps. It's entirely within the realm of possibility, but that's just how I see things, and it's pretty consistent with who I am. So I'm happy with it.
My conclusion is that you really can't approach the game as a game. It's more interactive media and literature, if you will, or like an interactive movie. Pete won't, obviously, but you develop. You take the time. You don't play it to complete in 4 hours. You explore. You develop all your options as much as you possibly can, and still enjoy yourself.
Yeah, I actually played it in one sitting.
Yeah, I didn't, so I don't know if that kind of changed my attitude towards the game, because it gave me time to decompress from the first portion to the next. But yeah, so I really enjoyed it though as a artistic exercise.
Mm-hmm. Pete,
so
I would suggest to our listeners that you could just go on Google Earth, take a navigation through your favorite state park while the plain white tees play in the background. Have a better gaming experience.
why the plain white tees?
Hey there,
Brutal.
Delilah. I've been waiting on that one all day. Been waiting on that one all day.
God damn it!
I missed it. What?
He said the plain white tees who made the song "Hey There, Delilah."
Oh, right.
Just
God.
like look at a national park on Google Earth, play that song, and you'll get more than you got from this game.
God.
Oh,
Like in New York City?
savage!
I don't think the forest fire covers enough burn from that comment.
Pete,
there.
you gotta drop the mic now.
Gino,
Oh.
final
What's your
thoughts
last
on
take,
next
Gino?
game?
Final thought on this game. I enjoyed it. I will probably play it again, just to, like, maybe with my fiance or something, just to see how it impacts someone else making the decisions. And I would like to explore the forest more, because I think that there were some segments of the forest that I didn't explore fully when I got different tools, because
Like
I
getting
was
your turtle.
staying on the main line. There's a turtle.
Gotta get that turtle.
I need to have the turtle.
You can also get a
So-
hat.
What?
2 hats.
Oh yeah, you can steal a hat. I didn't take the hat.
2 hats, and there's one at the back end of your tire as you're heading in. It's really quick. You got to be really quick about picking it up. Very start
Okay,
of the game.
That's good to know. But all those things, I want to take a look at it again, but ultimately I was left wanting. I wanted it to be more of a rumination on loneliness and on moving on from a long-term relationship, because that seemed to be what it was going to be about. And it just, the thriller element, I thought, provided impetus, and it gave the game a sense of momentum that I guess if you wanted a different kind of game, you might have been interested in that, but I wasn't. I wanted the deep introspection into these characters and who they are and why they're there, and not so much a murder mystery.
Yes.
And even though the murder mystery I thought was decently effective, like when I found Brian, that was a little bit moving. The story of a kid whose dad pushed him too far, and it cost him his life. Like, I thought that was interesting unto itself, but it didn't need to be in this other game. That could have been a game unto itself. That could have been something else. Or if you're going to tell that story, this game needed more time for me to care about Brian and his dad. Maybe I needed to meet Ned first, or maybe there needed to be some more stakes in that discovery instead of it being kind of ancillary.
Right.
So it is a game where it has a lot of the raw materials of something I would love, but it doesn't put them together into something that probably is going to stick with me. So I'm probably not going to be fighting for this all that hard come Game of our Year time, but I'm glad we played it. And so with that, that is our discussion on Firewatch, which means we have to pick what game we're going to play next, and it is my turn.
You up?
Billy looks upset already. You don't even know what I'm going to pick. What do you think I'm going to pick? What do you think I'm going to pick?
I don't want to say it.
Say it, Billy.
Does it have Roman numerals in the title?
Say my name.
How
What do
many
you think
gun
I'm gonna
blades are there in whatever game you're picking?
Is there any
No
costumes
gunblades.
with belts?
What's the sword to body ratio?
There are nope. There's a sword. There's a
I'm
sword,
not
but
gonna
it's
say it.
regular.
There's
Gino.
a sword.
You want me to say it, but I refuse to be bullied.
Say it. Say it. Say what
I'm
you
muting,
think it is.
I'm muting my mic. Bye.
Nope. Say. Pete, what do you think he thinks it is?
I think he thinks it's Final Fantasy IX.
He's wrong.
What?
What?
Billy's wrong.
He's wrong.
Billy's a damn fool.
What are
He
we
always
playing?
has been. Billy should put his headphone back on. It's not Final Fantasy IX, Billy.
I heard everything you said.
Okay.
What-
Just so
what are
long
we
as
playing,
you heard,
Gino?
you're a damn fool.
Treat me.
We're playing Overwatch.
Okay.
What?
We are playing Overwatch. So this is a multiplayer competitive shooter, which is not my realm at all.
It's not really the
However-
podcast wheelhouse.
Look
either.
at Billy's reaction.
Can we play
Billy's
Final
like,
Fantasy IX right now? Can we? What?
There is a sword. Yes. It's
There is.
reasonably sized.
All right.
Though.
Hey, look, I can get down with some Firewatch or some what Overwatch? Yeah, Overwatch.
We're
Overwatch. We're
exclusively
going to be
a
watching
watch
something
based.
different.
Yeah,
Going
we're
from
a watch
Firewatch to
based podcast,
Overwatch.
yeah.
Okay, fine.
Have fun with.
So I want to do a very specific analysis, I suppose, with Overwatch.
Okay.
I would like to play a few games. So let's say 10. The games are like 5 to 10 minutes. So I'd say like 20 games with random people, and then I want to play 20 games with you two.
Okay.
I want to have an experience where we are playing with completely random people, just getting a sense of the game and the community, and then I want to play with other people because from my experience so far, playing with random people versus playing with people who I am actually actively communicating with, it's two different games. And I want to see what makes that happen.
All right. Cool. This sounds way better than what I thought it was going to be. Sure.
What did you think it was going to be?
I'm not even going to talk about it because we got it in this podcast.
Fair enough. All right. So thank you, Billy.
Thanks everyone for listening. If nothing else, I think this should spark some goddamn feedback. I want to hear what you guys think. Who was right?
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Pete.
Always a pleasure, guys. Clearly, I was right, so I look forward to you affirming my opinions.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the permission and the opportunity.
Yeah, man. Good to have you.
And remember, if you want to get in touch with the show, at DeepListensPod, DeepListensPodcast@gmail.com, or deeplistens.libsyn.com. Remember, Billy is a damn fool, and he always has been. So, till next time, thank you for listening. Peace!